Thank you for joining us for an SCU Network. Today we have Symon Perriman presenting Hyper-V Security Best Practices. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and will be on the Presentations tab under systemcenteruniverse.com that will be posted there in 24 to 48 hours. You can also view any other SCU networks we're having on the SCU Network tab on the website. Also, please don't forget to ask questions using the ReadyTalk chat feature. So with that being said, Symon, please take it away.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. Well, welcome everybody. I'm happy that you joined us with this joint presentation from Five9 Cloud Security and System Center Universe, where we're going to cover a lot of tips and tricks to really try to address every single Hyper-V vulnerability that there is. First of all, I did want to formally announce here that coming up in February is the new System Center Universe 2016, which will be hosted near Dallas, Texas in the city of Irving. Also next week is System Center Universe Europe in Basel, Switzerland. So we certainly want to encourage you to attend these conferences. I've personally been to over 100 Microsoft conferences, and System Center Universe is always one of my favorite. It's really a great opportunity to work not really so much with the Microsoft folk, but really with the top community influencers. So if you're in the area, I would certainly encourage you to check those out, and hopefully I will see you there as well. So who am I? Well, I'm currently our Vice President of Business Development and Marketing, but prior to moving over to Five9, I spent 8 years with Microsoft, most recently as the Worldwide Technical Evangelism Lead, covering all of our virtualization technologies. Prior to that, I spent about 4 years on the failover clustering engineering team, where I actually built and developed a lot of the Hyper-V security and high availability features that we will be discussing today. Please, of course, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or through my corporate email, simon@five9.com. What we're going to do today is first give a quick introduction about our security company, what we do, but then we're really going to focus on these best practices for virtualization security. We're going to start by kind of talking about the most common threats and how managing a virtualized environment is different than securing a traditional static environment. I'm going to go through our different best practices related to security to figure out all these different vulnerabilities that you may already have but never even knew about, and then different solutions that you can use to help fill those gaps. Finally, we'll have our discussion summary and a Q&A. So please, again, take advantage of the chat window, ask us technical questions, non-technical questions, whatever you want to know, and we'd be more than happy to help you out. First, a little bit about our organization. Five9 Software was founded back in 2009, right around the time that Hyper-V was first introduced. And since its inception, Five9 has only ever been creating software for Hyper-V. It first started out with the management product, Five9 Manager, and that was designed to give a graphics-based interface that can run directly on Windows Server Core and Hyper-V Server. Well, that product evolved alongside the remoting capabilities for those operating systems, and Five9 Manager kind of bloomed into an all-purpose virtualization management solution, kind of like a lightweight version of System Center. Now, around the same time, we had a lot of VMware customers that were starting to evaluate Hyper-V, and they liked how familiar Five9 Manager was to vCenter, so they asked us to create a migration tool. And so we put together a free VMware to Hyper-V migration tool. Now, over time, we started to speak with more and more customers, and we found some great tips and tricks about how VMware does security throughout the virtualized environment. We took a lot of those best practices, and we developed Five9 Cloud Security, which is really a security solution that is optimized and designed for Hyper-V, trying to address every single vulnerability that exists in that virtualized environment. Now growing pretty fast. We have over 68,000 Hyper-V users worldwide. Part of our extended team helping us out throughout the local communities. So we're fast, and we certainly hope that we can work with you as a customer. Now, we are headquartered in Chicago. We have offices or points of presence in another 15 regions worldwide, and we're on track to continue to grow our expansion throughout Latin America and Asia throughout the rest of the world. We also want to stay active in the community and continue to give you high-quality technical webinars. And that's absolutely something that this will be today. We are going to be very technical. We really are going to try to focus on these best practices, speaking to the virtualization admin here. So we are, as a global company, continuing to do webcasts and also supporting multi-language webcasts. We have upcoming webcasts in Arabic, German, and Italian. Now, I mentioned the V2V converter very briefly, but essentially, this is what you can use to take a VMware virtual machine and go and convert it over to a Hyper-V virtual machine while minimizing the downtime. So if you are really looking for a migration solution, this is a great choice for you as an easy-to-use, wizard-guided experience. The management product that I mentioned was kind of like this lightweight version of System Center. What we essentially did is kind of take some of the best features of VMM and put them together in a single centralized product. So if System Center is not quite the right fit for you due to licensing, complexity, the dedicated hardware, we definitely encourage you to check out Five9 Manager as well as a great alternative for SMBs. Now let's dive into the core of our presentation and talk about virtualization security. Now, I know that many of you out there are probably infrastructure admins. You're the Hyper-V guy, you're the virtualization guy, and you don't necessarily understand the security side of things very well. Well, I came from that same background as well. I was a purely Virt guy. So for me to really understand some of the best practices around security, it was good for me to kind of establish a baseline. So let's quickly talk about what the key types of attack points are on Hyper-V, so that then we can next discuss how we can protect those vulnerabilities. Now, the first and most common one that we see are denial of resources, where you have a virtual machine that's behaving badly because of some person that's using it or some virus or other vulnerability, and it's consuming too many resources. That's hurting the host, that's starving the other virtual machines on that host from the same resources. And so we see denial of compute attacks very common, where you'll have some type of script running inside a virtual machine which goes and consumes all the memory possible. And this can be particularly dangerous if you have dynamic memory turned on and you have the maximum setting enabled. As you may know, dynamic memory is a feature in Hyper-V that allows you to specify some flexible maximum and minimums. However, when you deploy a virtual machine and turn on dynamic memory, its default setting is unlimited. Well, it's actually about 1 terabyte, but we assume most people don't have a terabyte of memory on their host. So this is a big challenge. Basically, as soon as you've deployed a new virtual machine and you have dynamic memory on by default, you're setting yourself up for a big vulnerability where someone can literally consume all of that memory on the host and starve everyone else. Now, denial of CPU happens as well when you have some complicated mathematical calculations, things like that that are happening. But for the most part, that's one's a little harder to take advantage of from a security perspective because CPUs generally do tend to be limited, meaning that there's only a couple that are available. It's not like memory where it has a much broader bandwidth of different settings. Probably the most common attacks that we see are things that are network related though. If you think about how a virus is actually going to get to your virtual machine, there's basically 2 ways. Someone can either walk up to that physical server and plug in a thumb drive and infect it that way, and unfortunately, we don't protect against those physical attacks. Or the threat has to go through the network, because that's the only other way that it can get routed to the VM. So these networks become extremely critical. It's important to protect them, especially the virtual networks as well. And we'll cover some best practices around that later. But through the networks, this is where you're actually going to get infected by the viruses. And you also see denial of network service attacks, where basically the particular network gets saturated, traffic can't get through, and it effectively blocks any end users from accessing that service. Denial of storage also happens, though it's not as common. Usually we see things where you'll have somebody doing lots of simultaneous read-write requests. That basically takes up all the storage capacity and slows down other applications or virtual machines that are trying to write to the same disk or the same SAM. The scariest one, though, and this is the one you most often hear about in the news, is when there's actually been a data breach or data loss. Someone's got into your network, actually has access to the data that's stored there, and then does something with that data, stealing credit card numbers, for example. Then have common ones for things like websites, where you just have a pure denial of service attack for what the customers want to access. Now, most businesses nowadays use the website as kind of their front end to run all of their business. You know, it's the face of the company, it's their shopping cart, and if that's unavailable, potentially they're losing customers. I've heard some scary numbers from some of these large online retailers where they're losing tens of thousands of dollars every minute that their service is offline. So think about that. You're down for an hour. You might have lost $1 million in retail business in that hour. I mean, that is serious for some of these organizations. So making sure that we have protection across all of these. But now the newest type of emerging threat that's starting to get a lot more press are known as advanced persistent threats, or APTs. In fact, this is becoming so popular that even Microsoft CEO Satya started talking about this during his keynote at the Ignite conference a couple of months ago. Now, what advanced persistent threats are, they're basically intelligent attacks. Most traditional viruses, they're just going to go and try to use all of your resources, right? It's going to try to saturate a network, thrash a disk, use up all your memory. But these advanced persistent attacks, they do something else. They're targeted for specific systems. They're looking for specific data, such as usernames or passwords. They spoof IP addresses. So, for example, you might think that you're sending information to a SQL server that's yours, where in fact it's being spoofed and you're sending your data to the bad guy's SQL server. These advanced persistent threats are scary because they're very much more sophisticated, they're harder to detect, and generally they do worse things with your data, really trying to go and steal things. So we wanted to really make sure that when you're thinking about protection, you're really looking at all of these different pieces of the virtualization stack. Now, reality is, though, virtualized environments really may never be secure, especially if you're given access to the public as maybe a service provider or a hosting provider or VDI. Now, whenever you have these end users or tenants, always have to worry about them just being stupid, doing bad things, downloading a file and not scanning it. It's just about who the consumers of your virtual machines are and what they're doing, because they're the most likely ones to introduce environment. Then, of course, have to be worried about, the storage devices people may be bringing into the office, and then traditional network attacks too. Now, another big risk is that in many cases, threats and viruses already exist in the data set, haven't been detected. In fact, there was a research report released about 3 months ago where they estimated 80 to 90% of all data centers are infected with multiple malware. That's kind of scary. Most people just don't know about it. And there's a couple of reasons why you may not know that you're infected. First of all, you may have downloaded a virus a week ago, but there wasn't a signature for it yet. So it stayed undetected. All of a sudden, you've downloaded some new signatures, it's been identified, and suddenly you realize you have this virus running in every VM across your entire data center. Another common type of threat detection, or ways that the bad guys hide it, are through specific settings that will actually trigger the virus and start it running. Now, most commonly, this is done with a time bomb, which is a specific point in time that it will trigger. A kind of an analogy to that would be something like Y2K. All of a sudden, a certain time happens, bad things happen. Now, Y2K, obviously, that was another reason why people were afraid of that happening. This is a similar concept. As soon as that time hits, something explodes, bad things happen. And a logic bomb is something that's similar, but rather than use time to actually activate the virus, they'll use some other type of heuristics or data. For example, they might wait until 100 of your virtual machines are infected to turn the virus on and make it full-blown. And so that way, they've already gone and kind of preceded all of the different pieces that they want to attack before you're even notified that there's a threat. So you've got to really be careful about these intelligent hackers today. Most data centers are already infected. Now, how do you protect with Hyper-V? So what are kind of the common security tools you want to think about? Now, when you're really trying to provide end-to-end isolation, you really want to find a suite of tools, not just a firewall. That's not going to be enough. However, firewall is suddenly going to be a key component. Basically, what the firewall is doing is taking a look at the incoming network packets, taking a look at the header, and the header is going to include things such as what type of protocol it's going to use, or the IP addresses. And so using that information, the firewall can say, yes, this packet can come through, or no, we're going to block it. So this is kind of the first level of protection. Next thing you want to think about is actually having antivirus and anti-malware scanning. So even if that virus does get through the firewall and it lands on a virtual machine in memory or, or on a disk, we then want to go ahead and make sure that we can detect it, quarantine it, and do whatever else we need to do to really, protect ourselves. Now remember, most of these things are going to be going through the network. So having traffic filtering in the network is a good way to do some active detection of the virus. And we'll talk about best practices for that later as well. The next common security tool you want to consider is intrusion detection. Now, what intrusion detection does is it's basically going to look at all of your different endpoints where traffic is flowing through. So this would be the different networks, different virtual machines, different hosts. And what it's going to be able to do is over time kind of build up what we like to call a baseline, kind of a standard of how the traffic normally operates in your environment. Now, once you have that baseline, what you're able to do is find anomalies in the traffic. So if all of a sudden a particular endpoint starts getting 10 times as much traffic, or all of a sudden your data center is now starting using a different protocol that you've never used before, intrusion detection systems should flag that. They should say, hey, there's some type of anomaly, something is odd, you need to go take a look at that. And that's definitely a key way for larger organizations to try to get some advanced detection. Network scanning is always critical too. Just making sure that any type of traffic that's going in or out of the environment, we're constantly monitoring, trying to keep it threat-free. Now, what we're going to be talking about today, though, is really focusing on just security for the virtualization stack. So we're talking about the Hyper-V hosts, and then the virtual networks, storage for the VMs, and the virtual machines themselves. What we're going to be talking about is not end-to-end security. So you always want to make sure that you're still following best practices for data center security, physical security, virtual private networks, secure logins, things like that, and of course Active Directory for identity. And the reason why is security for virtualized and cloud environments is very different. And we're going to spend the next couple minutes kind of talking about how virtualized environments are different than static environments, and then those best practices for how you want to go ahead and protect those. So one of the products that, our solution, of course, we are designed for Hyper-V. And as we've gone through over the last 7 years and been developing our product, we have focused on figuring out every Hyper-V security vulnerability and closing every Hyper-V security vulnerability. So essentially what our product is a suite of security tools really focused just on Hyper-V. So all of those, best practices, all of those tools, making sure that we're aware of, we're making sure that we support. Our first best practice we want everybody that's using virtualization to consider is automatic and immediate protection. Now, here's the challenge that traditional security solutions have that are not designed for Hyper-V. Now, if you kind of look at these all-purpose security solutions, people like McAfee, Trend Micro, kind of the big boys that you've heard of, they are an all-purpose solution. They do security the same way, whether you're running on Hyper-V, VMware, whether you're in a host, whether you're on a guest, whether you're in a virtual machine, whether you're on a physical server. And so their security solutions are what we call an endpoint-based solution. And what that basically means is you need to go and install a security agent inside everything that you want to protect. So inside the physical host, as well as inside each and every virtual machine. Now, if you've got to go and install a security agent in every VM, that's going to do a couple of things for you. First, that's going to slow down deployment, right? There's always an extra step. There's a chance that even if you're scripting that, some error happens and the security doesn't get installed. And it's also going to slow down deployment. Now, another challenge is if you're a service provider or a hoster, you may not even be allowed to have access to the virtual machine due to certain laws and privacy regulations. So then it even makes it impossible for you to go and install the security agent. So it's really complicated trying to go and use this traditional approach of security when you're in this virtualized environment. Now, if you have somewhat of a static virtual environment, it doesn't change much. Endpoint security could work for you. But if you have anything that's dynamic, it really becomes impractical. If you have virtual machines that are spinning up and shutting down, new virtual disks which are being added, new virtual networks which are being created, virtual switches, you always want to make sure that you're protecting here. So if you're in this dynamic environment, especially as a service provider, you have tenants creating new VMs, new networks, you really have to think of a different solution rather than traditional security, because it's going to slow things down and it leaves you at risk of being unprotected. So the way that we do all of our security, what makes us unique is our patent-pending technology, where we only install agents on the Hyper-V host. We never have to install anything inside the VM itself. So if you kind of think about how that threat, that virus is going to get to the virtual machine, basically going to go through our network, physical host, then going to get routed through the Hyper-V virtual switch, and then that network packet actually ends up at the VM. So if you kind of think about what that virtual switch does, it's basically seeing all of the traffic that's going to the VM. And remember, all of our threats go through that network. So what we've basically done is installed our security at the virtual switch, and that virtual switch is going to go and filter all of our traffic and inspect it. It sits at the kernel level, so we have deep integration, and we can basically say, yes, this is safe. No, this is not safe. We're not letting it through. And what this does is it gives us the ability to only install things on our Hyper-V host, and again, never have to worry about installing anything in the VM. That's going to be a lot of time saving and reduce your security risk if you never have to go and install an agent in that VM. But what that also does is it really is abstracting and hiding the security from the end users. Now, if you're a large organization, you probably have non-technical people that are using your virtual machines. You know, it could be someone from the marketing team, something like that. And if you're a service provider, you essentially have the public, which is renting your hardware. And you may not even know that person. In fact, you probably don't know that person, and you don't know what their intentions are. So the big risk with these virtualized environments here is you have end users, and traditional security solutions, you're expecting them to manage the security. So you're expecting these non-technical people to go and update their signatures, to do disk scans on a regular basis. If they find something, to know how to quarantine it, to know how to delete it. You're really trying to put in a lot of trust on your end user. Now, with the potential of having the public renting your hardware, if you're a service provider, you don't know what they're going to do. In many cases, hackers or people with bad intentions use these clouds to actually go and commit the crime from. They will go rent one of your virtual machines, and they will do a denial of service attack from your VM, hacking someone else. And the way they do that is they disable all of the security that's running inside the VM. So what's the only solution that's going to bypass these two problems? Well, don't give the end user access to the security. And so that's what we've really tried to do here with our design of doing this agentless security, is the end user never sees it. We've abstracted it. They can't touch it. They don't need to update it. They can't disable it. We handle all of that security for them. And we're able to centrally manage it. We're able to centrally update it. So we're also removing that administration burden from them. So for you, you get the benefit of not having to worry about your users doing something bad. And you can centrally manage security, so you can ensure that everything's updated and everything's consistent all of the time. Now, for our intrusion detection, we use Cisco Snort. That's the kind of the de facto intrusion detection system on the market. And for security and antivirus, we use Kaspersky Lab and ThreatTrack, two of the top guys on the market. So we're not actually writing the viruses ourselves. We're in a security management suite that's taking advantage of all these other programs and giving you a single unified interface where you can go have all of these different security features. Now, another best practice you want to think about with virtualization is maintaining the goal of isolation. Now, that's one of the key reasons why people virtualize. In addition to getting more VMs per host, it's also that benefit of having them run in an isolated setting, so that if you need to reboot one, it's not going to go and impact the other. Now, when you're doing isolation, though, it's important to make sure that each of the VMs get the resources that they require. Now, one of the most common security vulnerabilities here are these denial of resource attacks, where someone's going to starve one of the VMs, not give it access to the network or the memory or the storage that it needs. So what you can do is you can control different settings within Hyper-V and also Five9 Cloud Security to throttle this, to give a minimum bandwidth and a maximum bandwidth, or even a precise value. So you guarantee that every virtual machine gets the resources it needs, and also make sure that if someone's trying to do something bad with it, it's not going to go and consume all of your network capacity. One of the other common problems that we see with virtualized environments is that a lot of times the virtual networks have not been protected. So why does that happen? Well, if you kind of think about traditional security appliances that sit on a network, they're going to do a really good job of protecting traffic that goes between the hosts and actually gets routed through that network. But that's not the only type of network we need to consider when we're using Hyper-V. In addition to the external networks, there's two other types of networks that aren't going to get filtered by that scanner because the traffic never leaves the host. You have internal networks, and you have private networks that go VM to VM. Now remember, that network scanning appliance, it's not seeing any of that traffic. So what this means is if one of your VMs gets infected, it can infect every other VM on the same host through the private networks before anything is even detected. So this is a big threat, especially if, say, you're a service provider or a hoster, or if you're running your host at high capacity. Think about that. One infection can spread to every other VM on your host, unless you're also monitoring and protecting those private networks. So this is where we decided to build Five9 Cloud Security at that virtual switch layer. Remember, this is where we are actually doing all of our filtering. It's running on the Hyper-V host on that virtual switch. Essentially, this is the point of convergence for all network traffic going to and from a VM. And so by filtering the traffic at that point, we are able to go and filter all the different types of traffic that we need, making sure that we're protecting every network and avoiding blind spots. Another challenge that we hear from a lot of traditional companies is they're starting to invest more and more in Linux, especially since Hyper-V has really tried to embrace Linux and make it a first-class citizen. So the challenge is that, most people have been using traditional Windows Server with Windows Firewall, but now they also need to use a Linux firewall, and Windows Firewall doesn't protect Linux. So that means they ultimately have to have two firewall solutions and try to figure out a way to synchronize the settings across them so they're consistent. Now, what we've decided to do here is we're actually going to go and provide protection before that threat even gets to the VM. Remember, we're taking a look at this network packet and taking a look at the header and saying, are you able to pass through or not? Now, because we're doing that, it actually doesn't really matter what that virtual machine is running. We don't care because we never have to interact with the VM itself. We're intercepting the packet before it gets to the VM, whether that's a Windows Server VM, a Windows Client VM, or even a Linux VM. So what we're able to do is offer a much simpler security management solution through this consistency, having a single product that's going to go and protect all of your different VMs. Now, what happens, though, if that threat goes past the firewall? Most people actually have relatively open firewalls, and they're going to say that all HTTP traffic can go through, for example. So that's really nice, right? We're saying, yep, this is internet traffic, this can go through, but we're not actually making sure there aren't viruses in it. So you're saying, yes, this can come through the firewall, but what happens if there's a virus on it? Well, this is really where your antivirus is then going to come into play, where you want to have, you want to be doing the disk scans, which most people do. But we've also introduced a feature that's going to alert you when a virus arrives as fast as possible. And this is known as active detection. And this is definitely a best practice that you want to think about regardless of what security solution you're using. How can I get immediately notified when a threat comes? So what we're essentially doing here is we are taking a look at the data, which is in that network packet, We're going to start to scan the data and try to match that to our security signal. So if we detect all of a sudden, hey, this particular type of traffic now has this Trojan horse in it, we can immediately alert the admin or the end user and tell them, hey, there's a problem, you need to shut down, we've just detected something. So absolutely try to look at active detection as a great best practice in your environment. Now the other thing, which is the biggest challenge, other than the agents and agentless, biggest challenge are security scans. So this is when you go and do the antivirus scan. You've probably seen it pop up on your laptop maybe once a month, and it's basically going to go and scan through the system, right? Now, what's kind of happening behind the scenes is very complicated, and it uses a lot of resources. And what's going to happen here is if you have a virtual machine, or sorry, you have a Hyper-V host that's running at full capacity, and then you start scanning all of your VMs at once, that's going to cause a scanning storm. It's going to cause massive performance overhead. Some of the other security companies have about a 30% performance overhead when they do a disk scan. In that, all of your VMs slow down. You're actually going to create a denial of service attack on yourself by doing this disk scan, by slowing everything down, because you're going to be using up all your compute resources. So this means that you might trigger live migrations, you might trigger alerts, you're going to have performance issues. Or alternatively, you run 30% fewer VMs per host and have to buy a lot more hosts. Well, no one wants to spend more money buying more hosts just so they can run a security scan. Now, the reason why these security scans take up so much resources is they're basically doing mathematical calculations on every single file on every disk. It's taking a file, looking at some of the properties, doing a calculation, and seeing whether that number matches a virus's number. And if so, we've identified a threat. So this is massive, massive CPU overhead as you go through every file. So our best practice here is to do differential scanning. And fortunately, 5.9, we have another patent-pending technology here that allows us to do the fastest disk scanning in the industry. We're 70 times faster than some of the other antivirus solutions for Hyper-V. I want to emphasize 70 times, not 70%, but we're 70 times faster. Now, essentially, what we're doing here is we are just keeping track of the blocks of data on the disk that have changed, the deltas. And instead of having to scan the full disk every time, we simply scan those deltas. Much faster, much more efficient. And since we're doing our disk scans so fast, it doesn't cause these scanning storms. Or you might have a temporary burst for 10 seconds while it's scanning those last changes. But this is massively different than what you would see with a traditional security solution. You can still run your host at full capacity. You don't have to worry about slowing everything down. You don't have to worry about performance impact. So as you guys are planning your security solution for Hyper-V, really consider the impact that these antivirus scans are going to have on the entire operating environment. Now, another best practice that you're going to want to consider too is making sure that you have automation built in wherever possible. Now, automation is going to be really critical for security because as soon as somebody adds a new disk, you want to scan that. You want to make sure you're scanning your disks regularly, that it's on a schedule. And just like any other best practice, you want to make sure you're doing backing up regularly, replication regularly too, right? It's always a best practice to make sure that these key resources, these key components of your infrastructure stay protected in an automated fashion. Biggest reason why, you just want to eliminate human error, right? I mean, imagine if you had a guy who was manually doing your disk scans and he was sick on a Friday, he didn't back everything up or do a virus scan, and you got an infection and lost all of your company's data over the weekend. Yeah, that does happen, and it's not a very good story saying, oh yeah, we didn't run a security scan because this guy was sick. So always, always think about getting rid of the dependency on the humans. Invest that time in building automation for better consistency, better performance. Now, when you're also thinking about security, you want to make sure that you have an enterprise class solution. Now, before I go in and walk you through our architecture of 5.9 Cloud Security, I'm just going to quickly switch over to our console here and just show you a very quick demo of our interface here. So what you are seeing here is Five9 Cloud Security, the main management console. What it basically is a traditional MMC snap-in, so nothing fancy. However, we are actively working on our web-based version, so we will have a web-based GUI coming out in the near future. And what we basically do is use this to go and configure and set all of our rules. So you can see up in the top here, we have some global settings. And that's one big advantage of our security product here. You can go and configure settings once, whether that's firewall, whether that's different scanning rules, and go and apply those settings globally so that every new VM will get those same settings applied to it. So you're making sure that you protect everything as you need. We also have our templates. Templates can be very helpful as well, making sure that rules are consistently applied and rules are consistently followed. So this way, you might create a template for all of your SQL virtual machines, and every new VM that's a SQL VM, you can say, go apply these security settings, and again, you get that consistent security experience for firewall and your other components. Multi-tenant support. So this means that you can have different users that access different resources, and they have different levels of control and customization that they can have. But let's actually go take a look at this cluster, and more specifically this virtual machine on it. Now, first thing you'll notice here is the collection of firewall rules. Relatively simple here. You specify the rules, the directions, remote ports, things like that. Pretty easy to set up and manage. Now, we're always keeping track of the data, giving you the ability to do logging and view historical data. So if you had an attack 1 month ago, data was stolen, you still have the compliance, you still need the compliance laws that you would need to go back, review that threat, see how you got hacked, so that you can secure yourself in the future. All of our antivirus here is integrated. So with either using Threat Track or Kaspersky, you get to manage all of your antivirus scanning in one location, all using our single license. We have our active protection that's going to go and detect incoming threats. We have jobs that can be scheduled for when we want to scan our VMs or scan our hosts. We have integrated intrusion detection. We'll talk about intrusion detection again in a little more in a minute, but this is looking for those anomalies that are different from your normal baseline. We can scan our network traffic. We can take a look at all previous and existing connections in the environment. So you really have this whole suite of security tools all rolled up into one here. Now, if you're an enterprise, you want to ensure that you have high availability for your security as well. And the reason why is you want to make sure that if there's a threat that happens or a virus is detected, that you know about it. It would be terrible if your security system was being patched or serviced or updated right at the time when some virus was downloaded, you never got a notification, and then it's gone and infected your whole infrastructure. So high availability is critical for security as well, making sure the system's online and doesn't have a single point of failure. Now, for our Five9 Manager, we did design with enterprise-class security in mind. Now, the most basic configuration, you're going to have a management server. This requires about 8 gigs of RAM, so it's relatively lightweight. And then you're going to have a database where we store and log all of the different information, the network traffic, things like that. Now, the management server, it can run on bare metal. It can be installed just on a server, or it can run inside a VM. Best practice would be to put it inside a VM that runs on top of a cluster. This way, the VM has high availability. If it blue screens, the VM will get restarted. And follow those general best practices which clustering can provide. For the SQL server, we actually don't require SQL. You can use a variety of databases because we write in a standard login format. But since we focus on protecting Hyper-V, most of our customers already have SQL Server. This can also be the Express edition, so you can have an entirely free SQL Server. You don't need to worry about additional licensing or additional costs there. Now, to go and access the security, it's often good to have multiple management options. And this might vary based on the size of your organization. Now, I showed you our traditional console already, but we added PowerShell support. And having PowerShell support should be a requirement for any security solution related to Microsoft. Remember, PowerShell is the scripting language that really allows you to integrate and tie these diverse systems together. allowing you to pass settings, allowing you to have automation, allowing you to remove humans from manual tasks to eliminate that human error. So make sure any security system you have has PowerShell support. Now 5.9, we have an Azure Pack extension that we will talk about a little later, as well as integration with System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So depending on how you want to go and manage and interface with your security solution, or if you want to offer security as a service, that's something that we're capable of doing as well. Now once you've installed your management server, connected it to the database, and have a way to access it through a management console, you're then going to go and add your different hosts and clusters under protection. Now once you go and add a host, from that point on, we're going to start securing it. Every new VM that gets deployed will be protected. Every new virtual disk that VM is going to access to. Every new virtual network running on the host, and every new virtual switch which gets deployed. All of these are instantly and automatically protected. Now once you start to scale up, having just failover clustering may not be optimal to keep high availability for your security system. You may need to have continual availability, no downtime. And you can achieve this by configuring a redundant management group. So basically, it's a collection of management servers that are prioritized. And if one of them fails or becomes unavailable, the second one will continue to process all of the security settings and the workload. So this gives you high availability for the security service. If you're using SQL, you can take advantage of SQL Server's native high availability features. So SQL clustering, SQL always on. And then if you start to scale up even further, you have multiple data centers. You want to make sure that you have a security solution that can synchronize across them. So the changes that happen in one location, or new rules, or new templates, those are reflected in the other location, even if there's a long time gap from when those two sites talk to each other. So we have our own replication mechanism that ensures the data gets copied between our sites, between our security servers, so that all the configuration setting remains consistent. Now, one of the best practices you've really got to think about here is where your threats are coming from. Now, most people think that the security threat is going to be when someone on the public internet attacks them, an inbound threat. That's absolutely true. But if you're a service provider or a hoster, you also need to start to worry about outbound threats and internal threats. Now, basically renting your hardware to the public. And again, they might have ill will, bad intentions. They may want to go and create a denial of service attack from your hardware trying to take down someone else. So outbound security prevention is important for you too. Now, if you're also renting your hardware to the public, they might want to attack you and take down your own internal infrastructure or hold you for ransom. If that's the case, you've got to think about internal threats. So across all of these, there's really kind of a lot of considerations: inbound, outbound, internal. Now this is where intrusion detection comes in. What intrusion detection does is, again, it logs all of this network traffic over time. And what we're going to do is 5.9 is going to develop a traffic pattern based on your data center. So looking at what your normal security is. Now if there's some odd type of threat, some unusual activity, probably going to see some type of unusual traffic pattern. That could be that a particular endpoint gets used more, or a particular server, or a particular protocol suddenly changes. So once we see these anomalies, this is where we're going to raise an alert, flag it, and bring it to your attention. And so certainly for larger enterprises, having a solid intrusion detection solution, that should be part of your infrastructure. Now, most intrusion detection solutions, they're really only going to protect at the host level. So always consider the virtualization stack, that you now have VMs and virtual networks. So make sure that your security, your IDS solution also protects those virtualized resources too. Since 5.9 Cloud Security sits on the Hyper-V host, on that virtual switch, we are also protecting every VM and every network, trying to give you better analytics, better heuristics, so that we can detect those threats faster. Now, analytics is something that these large organizations really, really like. Being able to track this data and understand how things have behaved and how they can be improved. So we have an extensible login platform, and this is something that all security organizations need to have. You need to be able to figure out a way to take the data that's provided by the security tool and understand it, adjust it, customize it to what you need for your environment. So our best practice here is when you're thinking about security logging, make sure that the company is logging using an industry standard. Now, most people use syslog as a logging format. Basically what syslog does, it includes the header, the source IP address, the destination IP address, the sender, a timestamp, things like that. So that's what we do to log. We write in the standard login format. And all different types of analytics tools can read from syslog. So if you work with people such as Splunk, Azure Operational Insights, OpsLogic, AccelOps, HP Insights, there's a whole lot of different solutions that can do data analytics. You just want to make sure that they'll be able to read that and give you interesting information from it. Now, one thing we wanted to do to help embrace the Microsoft ecosystem is support System Center wherever possible. So we have a plugin for System Center Virtual Machine Manager. What this basically means is you can use VMM to manage your virtual security just like you can to manage all of your other virtual resources. So we basically isolated and put all of the cloud security features directly into the VMM console. And this is a free add-in as well. But our most recent investment has been around the technology known as Azure Pack. So Azure Pack is basically Azure running in your own data center on your own hardware. It's kind of taking all of this Azure code, Azure technology, and best practices and allowing you to add customization, allowing you to run it in your own data center on your own hardware. So with Azure Pack, we're starting to see a lot of service providers adopt this. Big reason is Azure has limitations. People love the concept of a public cloud. They like the fact that it has unlimited scalability, the fact that you pay as you go, the fact that it has all of this automation built in, the fact that it has self-service, so you can immediately and instantly request things. But what they don't like about Azure is the fact that Microsoft runs it and controls the services and the currency and the language. The fact that you don't have control over where your data is stored. Microsoft Azure has 17 data centers in 8 countries worldwide. But if you're not in one of those 8 countries, your data is going to be stored in someone else's domain. So data sovereignty, or being able to control where that data lives, has become a major issue for cloud providers. So Microsoft looked at this and they said, well, you know what? Each of these Azure data centers, it costs us about $1 billion. We obviously can't go and put that in 192 countries around the world. But we already have these partners that are running Microsoft technologies in all of these countries. We already have these service providers that have their own custom service portals, their own custom clouds. What if we made a way to take Azure and allow our service providers to run that? And that's essentially what Azure Pack is. It's the Azure technology running in someone else's data center in your own country. Now with this, Azure Pack's growth has exploded. People are excited to use it because they still get the power of Azure with its easy-to-use self-service portals, but they can guarantee the data stays within their own country. So what we've done is we've embraced Azure Pack, and we've integrated our security solution with it so that we can provide security as a service. Now what this essentially means is, if I'm an end user, I will go and deploy a virtual machine, and then I have a simple button that says, protect my virtual machine. Turn security on and off, turn intrusion detection on and off, turn firewall on and off. Now for the most part, people are going to want to have security turned on by default. It's a good best practice. But with these cloud environments, people do need customization and control. People might be developing applications that require odd firewall settings. People might be doing testing that require different types of security things to go through. People might be writing a unique type of communication that functions on a cloud system and floods the network, which ordinarily would cause a security alert. So there's a lot of reasons why people that are using a cloud service may want control of that security. So essentially, what we're able to do with Five9 Cloud Security is we offer better security for the infrastructure. We offer control of security for the end users. But perhaps one of the most compelling reasons for our service providers is they can take the security as a service and monetize it, productize it, offer it to their customers. Now think about that. If you have a virtual machine that costs, let's say, 20 euros a month, I would be willing to pay an extra 5 euros to make sure it has this guaranteed security. And so that's what we're seeing service providers doing. They are offering and they are upselling security to their customers, almost becoming a reseller. Now this means not only are they getting better security for themselves and their customers, but then even monetizing on it. They're able to offer a better service than their competitor by having that added security. And they can now make money on it. So the actual acquisition cost of Five9 Cloud Security can become almost none. We're actually setting up a deployment with one of the world's largest hosters as we speak. They estimate they're going to make over $100,000 this year on reselling the security as a service. So it really is a great opportunity for people to really get benefits for everyone, get this customization, the control, offer Azure Pack, and improve security for everybody. So let me quickly switch over to our demo again, and I'll walk you through some of that enterprise security management. System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Now I mentioned that the plugin has been integrated into the console, and so as you can see at the top of my navigation bar, we have Five9 Cloud Security Management. I can select my node. I see all of my VMs, and I can easily turn on and off all of these different settings with just a checkbox. So think about that. I can turn all of my intrusion detection, scanning, firewall, everything on and off from a single checkbox. And then we have those same other management features, managing your users, your permissions, templates, groups, all of those great things fully integrated. Now what I really like about the network service though, our network service can actually be added to a template for your network configuration. So you might be familiar with the concept of a logical switch within Virtual Machine Manager. And what a logical switch does is it's basically a template for your network settings on that Hyper-V host. And this is important because the network settings have to be consistent. The networks have to be the same on each Hyper-V host, so that when a virtual machine moves from host 1 over to host 2, it can access the same network using the same name. So what we've done here is we've integrated within these logical switch templates, and you have the ability to include our cloud security. And so what this means is when a new host gets deployed, you go and set all of those virtual switch settings, and you install Hyper-V Cloud Security at the same time. So this again helps with this automatic and immediate protection, and we're even extending that to the entire host now, making sure that as you deploy the new host, they get protected. Let's go and take a look at Azure Pack itself though. Now the difference between Azure and Azure Pack is when we actually start to look at Azure Pack, we see two portals. We get to see both the end user's portal, and we get to see the administrator's portal, which is what I'm looking at now. This is different from Microsoft Azure, because in Microsoft Azure, we only see what the end user sees. We're only the tenant. But that's what's different with Azure Pack. We get to control both sides of the experience. We get to control both the user, and we get to control the back-end infrastructure. So right now, I'm using the administrator's portal. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go and add cloud security, so that anybody that wants to use my gold security plan has the option to sign up for cloud security. Saying add a new service, select cloud security, confirm, and now any of my Azure Pack users which have access to this plan now have the ability to go and use the security as part of that plan as well. So very simple to get configured once you have Azure Pack up and running. Now within the cloud security, as an administrator, I also get to centrally view all of my different resources, virtual machines, get my templates. I also get to view the resources that my individuals are using. So how many VMs, firewalls, traffic scanner, intrusion detection. And this is important for me so that I can bill or charge back everybody based on the resources they need. In our latest update, we've also integrated notifications, so you can get an email alert every 1 minute all the way up to every 24 hours based on different events that are happening in the data center. But let's take a look at what the end user sees briefly. So if I'm an end user, I've already deployed my virtual machines. I want to now go and protect them. So protecting a new virtual machine is as easy as saying new cloud security, like the virtual machine that I want to protect. Click OK, and we're done. And we've now gone and enabled this security for this virtual machine. Now, we'll select that, we'll confirm. So actually, see, we've added it. So going and turning all of these settings on and off, it's as easy as one button. Turn on and off intrusion detection. Turn on and off traffic scanning. Very easy, very simple, very straightforward. And from here, I'm able to drill in to see details. I can see what rules are available. I can see my logs, intrusion detection, traffic scanning, connections. And of course, I have the ability to deploy virtual machines, deploy templates to my virtual machines as well. So for example, I have my SQL virtual machine. I can say, let's apply a template. My SQL template confirmed. I've gone and consistently applied all of those rules. So a very easy way to offer this advanced security management through a simple interface self-service portal. Now, if you are interested in acquiring Five9 Cloud Security, please visit our website or contact sales@five9.com. We do licensing consistent with Microsoft, where we license per 2 CPUs. So if you're buying 10 licenses for Hyper-V, you'd buy 10 licenses for us. And we also have pricing for service providers. And this is based on the number of VMs that you're currently protecting. So 1 month you protect 100 VMs, and different months you protect 200 VMs based on different seasonal fluctuations. We accommodate that. You only pay for what you use. So it's kind of pushing that consumption-based model all the way through the loop back to licensing. And all of our other sub-licensed security tools such as Kaspersky, ThreatTrack, and Cisco Snort, those are already included as part of our license to keep it simple and have you work with us as a single vendor. As I wrap it up here, I think the key point that I want everyone to take away here is that virtualized security is different. There are security vulnerabilities that are unique to virtualized environments and even unique to Hyper-V. So when you're thinking about your security solution, don't go all-purpose. Make sure you do have something that's going to protect your private virtual networks. Offer this immediate and automatic protection. Hide security from the users and from the bad guys. Do the fast disk scanning so that you don't have a performance hit. All of these are going to be best practices whether you use our security solution or someone else's. This is what you really want to try to find to really harden and protect your Hyper-V virtualized environment. Now really though, biggest thing you've got to think about here now is the sophistication of hackers. Hackers are no longer high school kids. Hackers are organized crime units, rogue nation states that are making millions of dollars a year on stealing your information. They are smart. They are sophisticated. They know that a lot of people are using Hyper-V, and they know about every single vulnerability that I've talked about. So if you really want to make sure you have the most resiliency, keep in mind that virtual security is different. Try to find a solution that's really optimized for Hyper-V. Again, we have a lot of upcoming webinars. I certainly want to encourage you to come and check these out. We'll continue to dive into different types of security and management best practices covering a variety of different languages. Please feel free to download this presentation afterwards. We'll make it available. We will be sending out a follow-up email shortly. These resources will be available there. And once again, I want to remind you, if you're based in the US, to sign up for System Center Universe 2016. I'll be out there myself, most likely presenting on this or a similar topic, so it'd be great to meet face-to-face. And of course, don't forget System Center Europe next week over in Switzerland. All right, well, thank you all for attending. What we're now going to do is spend the next couple of minutes going through the Q&A. Alex Karavanov is our Director of Solutions Engineer. He's been helping me out in the background addressing your questions, and I'm going to bring him on briefly, give him a chance to ask me some of the great questions that have come up throughout the course of this recording.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. This is Alex here. So indeed, we received quite a few great questions here, and one of them is related to VDI scenarios. So our listener is actually interested
good question.
if they can use it for VDI.
Absolutely. So to set some context, VDI is virtualized desktop infrastructure. It's basically doing virtualization, but doing it for client workloads. Now, the biggest difference between doing that and server virtualization is the client workloads, you're going to have more of them. They don't require as many resources, so instead of maybe having 10 to 20 VMs on a host, you might have 100 to 200 VMs on a host. And so that introduces scalability challenges, and that introduces the fact that you're likely to have non-technical users actually logging into the VMs. So to answer the question, yes, Five9 Cloud Security absolutely supports VDI. And in fact, we've recently embarked on partnerships with several of the top VDI solution providers who are trying to build integrated solutions with our product. So yes, we can protect that. We meet the scale of VDI. And the biggest benefit for VDI is, again, that agentless security, right? You're deploying all of these VMs, whether they're from a pool, whether they're persistent, and you don't have to worry about the security or keeping it updated. We have that protection from the host level. You don't have to worry about those guys updating their security, maintaining it, or disabling it. It's all agentless. It's hidden from that end user. All right, what's next, Alex?
Yep, so another great question that we have that we surely have to shed some light on. So as we use Kaspersky and ThreatTrack for Five9 Cloud Security, so the question is, do I need to have separate licenses for Kaspersky or ThreatTrack for antivirus?
Right, great question. No, we've simplified the licensing model, so we pay those guys a royalty directly. So basically, you would acquire our product either through us, through a reseller, through a partner, whoever that is, and that's all you need to worry about. We'll handle all of the money, the licensing, and the royalties on the back end. So ultimately, that becomes our responsibility. You only have to work with us. And it's great if you already have Kaspersky or ThreatTrack running in your data center. It's just an even more streamlined, nice integration story there too.
Oh, yep. Thank you, Symon. And we also have a question coming from the chat box, actually, not from the questions box here. So this is related to our Windows Firewall integrations. Obviously, the question is this way. So do you recommend on disabling Windows Firewall when systems run Windows when Five9 Cloud Security is being used?
Yes and no. So I'll clarify what I mean there. Biggest thing to keep in mind is we are focused on the virtualization stack, right? So Hyper-V and above, we're protecting. You do want to go and disable the Windows Firewall there because we're already going and offering an even more advanced version of that, more capabilities. And all that would be happening is they wouldn't conflict, assuming that you had the consistent firewall rules. They wouldn't conflict or anything, but it would be an extra layer of filtering that you're adding. So, you could hit, you'd have a small performance issue there if you're going through double firewalls. Big challenge, though, is, of course, if they're misconfigured, they're non-consistent, you might have some actual challenges of, I thought this was going through the firewall, it's not going through. So as a best practice for the virtualization stack, you would want to turn off Windows Firewall, use our solution instead. And, of course, it's universal. So if you have Linux VMs, you configure it once, it's the same settings. The reason why I said the other part of that is you still want to make sure you're protecting the rest of your data center. VPN hosts, if you have physical domain controllers, all those other infrastructure pieces that are not part of Hyper-V, you might want to still use Windows Firewall for that.
Good. Thank you, Symon. And we have another great question here that's also related to service providers. So how does the licensing work for service providers?
Yeah, sure. I'll go into a little more detail on our service provider licensing model. So as a service provider, you can decide that you want a license per host. Sometimes that might be cheaper based on density, or you can have the flexible model, which is pay as you go. So what we do, we basically do either monthly or annual billing. Most people prefer monthly when they reach a certain amount. And what we'll basically do is at the end of each month, we'll check in with you, If you say this month I had 100 VMs, we'll charge you that price. The next month you have 200, we charge you that price. And so it allows you to have the flexibility that you may have, right? Similar to your customers, you might be very, very busy during the holiday season with peak traffic. You might be protecting more VMs, and then it may scale back in January. So similar to that, we want to be flexible, work with you on the licensing. So it's basically pay as you go per month or per year per virtual machine.
Cool, thank you. So it looks like we've just run out of our time here, so I would probably keep the rest of the questions for now.
Sounds great. Well, we'll certainly follow up with everybody that asked an individual question that did not get answered. With that, we will wrap it up. I do want to say thank you once again for joining this webcast. Hopefully you learned a lot about the best practices around virtual security and how it's different from that traditional security. I also want to thank System Center Universe for sponsoring this webinar. It's been great to once again partner with the team, and we certainly encourage you to stay engaged with the program for other webinars, as well as the great in-person conferences that are coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Symon. And as a reminder, this webinar will be on the Presentations tab under systemcenteruniverse.com in 24 to 48 hours.